Joining me today is Dr. Julianna Lindsey, author of Radiant Longevity, a physician's protocol for living your best life. Some say a birthday is, quote, only a number. In truth, every birthday you celebrate can advance disease progression, but the good news is it doesn't have to. When properly managed, aging can also be a disease regression, a time to take stock of where you are in terms of your health, what you need to change, and where you want to go from there. How we live and thrive boils down to the way we manage the moments that make up our lives and the choices we make in those moments. Using her training in multiple disciplines, her clinical work with patients, and years of consulting, Dr. Julianna Lindsey explains how you can have an impact on your health and longevity by identifying and addressing your health risks. She's board certified in internal medicine with additional training and certifications in anti-aging and regenerative medicine, functional and integrative medicine, lifestyle medicine, bioidentical hormone or optimization, and peptide therapy. Welcome to the show, Dr. Julianna Lindsey. Nice to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathryn.
Well, all right, great to have you. I think I'm going to just pick out the keywords that I mentioned in the intro, which I think is a good way to start the interview. You can have, I said this at the end, you can have an impact on your health and longevity by identifying and addressing your health risks. Is that the first thing we have to do?
I think that's a great place to start, is taking an inventory of your health and partnering with a physician who you trust and getting biomarkers, having a deep conversation with that physician, and so that they know your family history, the exposures you've had, the lifestyle you're living currently, and just really get a good comprehensive view of what is going well with you and what could use some improvement.
How many doctors actually do that? Even before I knew I was going to interview you today, I had this conversation with my partner, and he and I are talking about it seems that most doctors, or I'll say many doctors, don't do that. They don't, you fill out these forms either online or in the office, right? And it seems to me they don't take a look at them. Like, where are you coming from? What's the context, is what you're saying, of whatever your issues are. And they seem to gloss over it. Maybe it's the doctors I've been going to, I don't know, but um, they don't do what you just said is really key, or what's important.
Kathryn, I think that's an excellent point. I don't even ask our patients to fill out forms at all. If we want to know something about a patient, then we do that in a conversational manner. The reason we do it that way is because you can you can learn so much about a person in a conversational way that you would never learn off a piece of paper. You can just find a thread that you need to pull, and it can lead you in a completely different direction than any form ever could. And you have to give people time to really open up to you.
Can you give us an example of that? Someone sitting in your office for the first time, as you say, you can ask them to write stuff down on paper or online. You engage in a conversation. How do you do it? How do you open it up? You have a let's say a 65-year-old female woman, uh, and she's, I don't know, complaining of some kind of cardiac issues.
Well, we start with the facts, right? Because people are very comfortable relating, or usually pretty comfortable relating facts. And then as you establish some rapport with the person in front of you, then establish some trust, then you can get into deeper conversations like like serious psychological trauma they may have had, for instance. And that is not uncommon in the life of humans. And all the trauma that people have had in their lives is going to leave a mark in some way. And sometimes that is radically affecting their health. So us getting to know our patients on a very granular level and having that deep relationship with them is very important for us to be able to take care of that human being in a holistic fashion.
Are you bound by any particular time? We talk about, 50, doctor has 15 minutes and that is it. But in your practice, it seems to me that's not the case.
Well, I established this practice in 2020, early 2020, and I established it with this framework in mind. We are not on a 15-minute interval. We never will be. I think that is the root cause of a lot of the issues that you brought up, Kathryn, when you were speaking about your experiences with most physician offices, is that they just don't have time to really sit down, establish rapport, and get a deep history with the patient, which leads to having a deeper relationship with that patient and establishing trust. So when we always meet someone before we accept them into the practice to make sure we're a good fit for them and also to make sure they're a good fit for us. So we will have gotten to know them somewhat during that initial 1 hour meeting. When we schedule them for an intake, that is going to take most of a day, actually. We ask them to schedule a day, and then, of course, we have all these various tests that we do, which are quite extensive. But then, if they need 2 or 3 hours to sit with us as physicians, one-on-one, talking, then we have that luxury to spend that time with them. And of course, when you have a practice like that, it cannot be insurance based. That would be impossible to make that work, because insurance reimbursement would not be an economic model that could ever work.
So is yours a concierge doctor's? Is that what it is? Or would you describe it as that?
So our services are cash based. I do not use the word concierge because that's really a trash can term. It doesn't tell you anything about the quality of care that you're going to get, the time that is going to be spent with you. What you're paying for with quote concierge is access, but you may not be getting anything more than what you've been getting at your standard primary care office. You just have greater access to that doctor. So we have a longevity practice. I wish I could think of a better, more descriptive term for what we do, but I personally avoid that term concierge. It
Okay,
also
so
cash based.
I'll never mention that word again. uh, uh, Forget about concierge. So yours is cash based. You're really spending the whole day. You really are getting to know the patient. So how many patients can you have in your practice? Can one have in their practice if you're practicing medicine in that framework?
So each doctor cannot have more than 150 patients. That's where we top out. And then if I start reaching that limit, then we look at hiring another physician.
How many physicians do you have in the practice?
3 currently.
And do you use physician's assistants?
We do not. There is I'm sure physician extenders have a great place in the right setting, but we feel like our patients deserve the care of a fully trained physician, and the training hours for a physician as opposed to a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant is tremendously different. So it's just a different level of knowledge. There are fantastic advanced care providers out there. We just do not use them in our model.
But you said you started this practice in 2020. Are you unique? I mean, it sounds unique to me. But how many practices like yours, or do you know, around the country?
Well, we have done extensive market surveys around that, Kathryn, because I think that is a good question. And we have not yet found anyone who is approaching longevity and health in quite as comprehensive a way as we do. So I feel very fortunate about that. And as a result of that, that's why we have patients that come to us from all parts of the United States.
Okay, so let's get into like what I think I mentioned this in the intro also. You show people in this practice how to turn back the clock on aging. How do you do that?
Great question, Kathryn. And that all starts with metabolic health. So, the way our cells talk to each other, the way our organs function as an integrated unit, that is all dependent on our cellular and metabolic health. So if something is off in our metabolic health, and I guess the biggest offender I think of off the top of my head is insulin resistance. So if your body can't use insulin properly and you're insulin resistant, you are sustaining microscopic damage to your system on a daily basis. If we check fasting insulin levels, and I was reviewing someone's insulin level yesterday, and his insulin level fasting was 20. So he perceives himself to be fit. He, quote, feels good, exercises, but he's got a genetically determined metabolic problem. He is doing a lot of the right things, but he is still insulin resistant. And it's,
I'm going to stop you because what does a 20 mean? What's the I mean, what, you know what I mean? Like,
oh, yes, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
that's okay.
So a fasting insulin of 20 is quite high. His fasting glucose is also high, and we do extensive whole genome sequencing on our patients as well. So we know what they are genetically predisposed for. So that is a tremendous help in practicing precision medicine. But when your insulin level is that high, your cells are not effectively taking up sugar, and you're just sustaining damage to your system every day. It's very difficult to lose weight. People who are insulin resistant commonly have brain fog. It's very hard on your brain and nervous system and the rest of your body if you're not handling sugar in your body well.
Does this happen as you age? I mean, does it tend to happen in two ways as you age and your body starts to, I'm saying, deteriorate, and or you could have, there's a genetic component to it, even if you are doing all the right things?
So the answer to both is yes. You do tend to become more insulin resistant the more birthdays you have, and there are also genetic factors that are going to predispose people to insulin resistant. I'm sure you've heard of families that have type 2 diabetes, and most of the family members, regardless of what size they are. So that those folks very likely have a genetic determinant of their insulin resistance. And sometimes we can't always address that purely with diet and lifestyle. I wish we could, but when, and the reason I don't use the term functional medicine, I don't, and we do practice functional medicine, but we also use prescription drugs when required to really optimize someone's metabolic and cellular health.
Do you usually have to, because you say lifestyle uh, and diet and those kinds of things don't help? Probably, I guess, if you have a or genetic component to it, like with type 2 diabetes. So that is it usually medicine that you have that a person has to take?
So I think diet and lifestyle always help for sure. Whether it can be fully addressed with diet and lifestyle, that's a question. And the part of the answer to that is how committed someone has the capacity to be very strict with diet and exercise. Some people just don't they're busy, young kids, busy careers. They may not have the mental bandwidth to fully engage in the diet lifestyle that has to be so precise for that person to manage their insulin resistance. But diet and lifestyle always help. But if you have the right markers, then a lot of times we'll either go to a natural supplement if that's really what they prefer, or onto a prescription drug.
I was looking up some of the statistics when I knew I was going to be interviewing you, and I guess some of these statistics come from the CDC, but 75%, you talk about diet, let's start with that, and lifestyle, I guess. 75% of Americans are overweight and or obese. 3/4 of the population. Yeah.
That is tragic, Catherine, and you can look around us and see how that is playing out and why Americans are our life expectancy is falling instead of increasing like other developed countries. So it's a shame. The There are a lot of, that causes for that are multifactorial, but I think our food supply is a big part of that. If you if you eat a meal here in the United States, um, you expect what we get. A lot of times you'll feel bloated, not so great afterwards. If you eat the same meal in Europe, in one of the Western European countries or Eastern European countries for that matter, then you can feel completely different after a meal. Their food is different. The wheat they use in their bread is different. It's a different experience eating in the United States with all the stuff, which is not food, that we put into our food, which is chemically engineered to be there so that people want to buy more food. And it's just kind of, it's a sick system how that's been allowed to perpetuate. That our food is engineered to sell more food, and
Yeah.
we've
And
allowed
to
that.
become addictive in a way. It's interesting that you should say that. I just got back from Norway for 2 weeks, and it really exemplifies, I guess you would say, exactly what you're saying. If you go to a museum, for instance, or you go to any public place and you want to have lunch, even cafeteria style, get a nice piece of bread and cheese and and vegetables and fruits, and entirely different than if you attempt to do the same thing here in the States. Whether you're in the city or in the country, it doesn't really matter. But that is so true.
I think that's a great example, and I hope that we can get some of that turned around. The thing that concerns me around our food supply is there's so much money involved in changing that I think it's going to be challenging.
Yeah, money and politics, and as you said, multifaceted. There's just a lot of stuff that ends up on our plate, I guess, because of all those things, right? That's not good. So you really have to be very conscious. You have to be aware. You have to be well educated. It's not just, I mean, you mentioned, busy families, but um, if you want to mitigate that kind of eating, you have to be aware and then you have to act on it, which I guess we're not doing.
Well, there's so much people have already to do, but it does require intentionality. But in the end, Catherine, our lives are just made up of habits, right? So it's about forming habits around your meals and your food. Just if you can stop bringing that processed food into the house, it's a big help. And then if you can further stop going through drive-through windows, you'll be much better off as well. And that means pretty much any drive-through window.
Yeah, we're not targeting a specific drive-through window, just drive-through windows in general. Not a good thing. Um, Now I'm going to change a little bit because you talk about attitude, and how attitude affects how we age.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
We know that people who have a positive outlook on life, have an optimistic outlook on life, live on average anywhere from 8 to 13 years longer than someone who has a pessimistic or negative view on life. That's pretty amazing to me. The way we think, the way we handle our emotions, the way we handle our relationships, that that really deeply affects how our brain and bodies work, from cortisol levels to just general stress on your adrenal glands. And it's stress, or bad stress rather, does take a big toll on our body. And I think people who are optimistic experience much less stress in their life because they kind of like, I just generally believe things are going to work out. I know I have to work hard to make things work out, but I have absolute faith with positive outcomes, right? And I begin my day with gratitude. I think that's another super important thing for folks to do is just have a gratitude practice. It helps keep you in a positive frame of mind and kind of keep the stress demons at bay.
I think another thing is, I think what goes along with what you're saying is uh, good choices. We tend one poor choice builds on another poor choice, as if one good choice also builds on another good choice, and really be cognizant, be aware of the choices that we make. And I think sometimes we tend not to do that. We make choices in a rush, in a hurry. We don't really sit and think about it, and that's another thing that impacts us in a very negative way, causes us to grow old fast.
I absolutely agree, and that's one another way that habits can help us, right? Because if you go to your default mode, you're going to do what's easier, what you're used to doing. If you have if you have a bag of cherries sitting on your counter ready to eat versus having a bag of potato chips on your counter sitting there, um, you're going to choose it's make it easy to make the right choice and be intentional. Don't make it don't make it hard. You want to remove those barriers to making good choices. Have good food in the house. Live in a way that's conducive to movement. Have good relationships. Those habits help protect us in times of stress and when we're in a rush.
Now, we do this as adults. It would seem to me we really have to start with our children, right? I mean, we have to do it as adults too, but don't we have to start from the beginning? I always find it interesting. A lot of the uh, Gen Zs, and maybe the Gen Xs too, but they're so concerned about what their infants eat and formulas. And, I'm in New York City and they order formula from Europe because it's better and also a lot more expensive and those kinds of things. But then after a while, after the kids or the babies get over that stage, then they end up at 4 and 5 just giving them the foods that we've been describing that aren't good for them, or letting them eat junk food, or they sort of don't follow through.
I think that's a great point, and I would say to the now, I was very committed to breastfeeding my children, and that is a way to absolutely get them the best start in life. So, if people are looking for the best formula, then they may be off on the wrong track to begin with. Now, not everybody can breastfeed, but certainly if you're wanting to give your child the best start in life, that's breast milk.
How long
If
should we be feeding? I did it for a year and a half with my 3 kids. But yeah, what's the optimal, or what time that one should breastfeed if they can, let's say.
Yeah, yes, if they can. So I fed my children 6 months exclusively breast milk. I had a varied diet during that. I did not change my diet in any way. So I made sure to eat every different kind of food that I could get my hands on, just so that they were had early exposure to those antigens, and that was kind of part of their immune system. And fortunately, neither of my children today have any kind of food allergies and very few environmental allergies.
Yeah.
At 6 months, I went and supplemented with table food, and actually, both my kids self weaned at around 17 months.
Yeah, my kids did too. They sort of did it on their own, and it was about maybe 13, 14 months. All right, this is part one of my interview with Dr. Julianna Lindsey, author of Radiant Longevity, a physician's protocol for living your best life. We're going to take a short break, and we will be back with part two because I have a lot more questions for Dr. Lindsey. Joining me today for the second half of our show is Dr. Julianna Lindsey, author of Radiant Longevity, a physician's protocol for living your best life. And she and I were discussing in the first half of the interview. One of the ways to live your best life starts with helping your children to live the best life. And that has to do with diet and food and lifestyle and starting young. Let's talk about it. Dr. Lindsey, we were talking about feeding our children and how important it is to give them a good start, obviously.
Yes, and we have a lot of conversations with our patients because we hear from people with too much regularity that their diet is negatively impacted because of the food that they keep in the house for their children. I'm not sure why you would want to keep food in your home for your children that you shouldn't be eating yourself. If it's destructive for an adult body, it's going to be probably even worse for a young, growing, developing body. So committing your entire family to a whole food diet that is devoid of processed foods is a commitment worth your time and effort.
When you ask parents why they do that, I mean, what kind of an answer do you get? Like, why do you, as parents, keep this food that you know is not good for you? And if it's not good for you, like you say, it's certainly not going to be good for a growing body or a growing brain. What's the reasoning behind it?
We hear it's often to the tune of peer pressure. If they have other kids over, they feel like there's some kind of pressure on them to have junk food in the house. I think that's head trash we put on ourselves. I think kids are perfectly happy eating healthy food if it's put in front of them. But what it boils down to, Kathryn, is some lack of education around this, but it's also a lot of the path of least resistance. So you have to be more intentional about having whole food, preferably organic, in your home. And I really, I regularly address this with parents, people drinking out of plastic water bottles and feeding their kids plastic water bottles at sports events and whatnot. I think that's an especially bad move.
Talk to us about that, because I'm not sure that many people obviously know that that's not a good thing, but I'm not so sure that maybe and I'm going to say the masses of people are really aware of that. So that it's really bad to be eating or drinking out of those plastic bottles. What does that do to us? What does that do to our kids?
You know, I'm not even sure we know quite yet all the harm that that's doing. We do know, based on autopsy data, that microplastics have been found in every organ system in our bodies. So microplastics are depositing into our brain, our heart, our kidneys, pretty much everywhere we've looked. They've been able to identify microplastics in the tissues. So I think we're just having it, starting to see now generations of people that have been raised on those plastic water bottles. And I'm afraid we're going to see just a whole other level of chronic disease and, I'm afraid, cognitive decline based on all those microplastics.
So,
So
so do you think two things that I know that there's an upsurge in younger people being diagnosed with cancers, like in their 40s and even 30s and 40s, and that could be one of the reasons, and that's one thing. But then older people, you think that has something to do with dementia or a correlation between plastic bottles and dementia?
we haven't absolutely made that correlation yet, but unfortunately, to me, that mechanistically makes sense. That if you've got microplastics in your brain, how are your brain cells going to effectively communicate with one another, make the neurotransmitters that need to be made, and you just maintain a healthy blood flow and tissue if you've got microplastics in the interfering? They were not part of the original human body design. We don't, our bodies have not learned how to handle that yet. It's such a new thing. And I learned from an environmental engineer patient of mine recently that every watershed, water supply in the United States has now been found to contain microplastics.
So what do we do? Uh, I mean, if all our water supplies, I know I was just at actually we just at a museum, and it was in Norway, where they had an exhibit of all the plastics that, animals that they had, fish and whales and all the um, in the ocean that, when caught and killed, actually, I guess, or they're filled with water, plastic and water, all that kind of stuff. You're talking about water bottles, and of course, that's what we're eating and drinking.
Yeah, it's terrible. Um, and people are going to have to, you're going to have to take responsibility for yourself in this area. The only water filtration method that reliably removes microplastics is reverse osmosis filtration. That is the only water I drink from in our home. Everything in my kitchen, every faucet in my kitchen gets reverse osmosis water. We have a whole house filter as well, but it's difficult to filter large volumes of water through reverse osmosis, like with a water plant. But you can certainly get a reverse osmosis filter for your home and then refill metal containers for your kids and for yourself to drink out of through the day.
And you talk about taking individual responsibility. Then don't we have to maybe take it one step further and make our politicians aware of this, and to uh, maybe do things or do something about it in terms of food supply, water supply, that kind of thing?
I do think that is important, Catherine. I'm grateful that there are activists out there who spend the time and are dedicated to this work. I do not have the time or capacity to do that personally, but I do have the commitment and capacity to take personal responsibility and take care of my family in the best way I can. Now, we do need to speak out for people who can't afford things like a reverse osmosis filter, or they don't live in a place who that can have a reverse osmosis filter, right? So not everybody lives a kind of life where you can just do these things. So it is important for us to advocate for our entire communities to have clean water and clean food.
But start with our individual responsibilities, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. What about, okay, so I think what we haven't touched on is exercise. You talk about tailoring exercises or exercise around your needs and your ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a one size fits all.
Not at all. And the thing I discourage for people is when they're going to commit to exercise that they they're going to start on Monday and they're going to do 17 things that they've never done before
Yeah.
in a way that doesn't fit in their lifestyle. Just move your body. Keep it simple. Simple is typically it's always the best way to start. Just moving, just taking 7,500 steps a day, Catherine, takes us a long way down the road to longevity. Just avoid being sedentary and just get your body moving. You do not have to belong to a gym to achieve physical fitness.
Get out and walk.
Get out and walk. Get that sunshine in your eyes and on your skin. When you are getting sunshine on your skin, I would recommend doing that when the UV index is 3 or less. That way you don't have to worry about slathering yourself quite so much with sunscreen, and you get that natural light on your skin. But that sunlight is very healing and therapeutic to the human body.
It reminds me of one of my boys was on the swim team, and the high school was just 2 miles from our house. And he called me up one day and said, "I don't have a ride home. I missed the bus. What can I do?" I said, "I think you could walk. You can actually walk the 2 miles." And it was sort of like I said, you're a swimmer, I think you'd be able to do that. And it was kind of like, oh, okay. But it just struck me as it's a mindset.
But also, that's the habit that he had formed, right?
Yeah.
Getting a ride. So just our habits keep us going one way or the other.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about habits, you can't just give up a quote bad habit. You really have to replace that with something else.
Yeah.
You've heard nature abhors a vacuum, so
But it's what you said. You have to be aware first. You really like this is just a habit and it's not a good habit, and I can change it, and I do have choices. Let me sit down and think about it. And you have to be able to do do that. Just, don't do it on automatic pilot. Do stuff that isn't good for you. Um, when you talk about exercise, okay, so we have different, you have different cohorts, different age groups,
mhm.
and you have a growing population of people, let's say over 65. I think what a third of the population is over 65, or it's going to be very soon.
Yes.
Yeah. So, what kind of advice do you have for that group? These are baby boomers, let's say 60 to 80.
Well, it's similar to the advice I have for most age groups, which is start where you are. I have a patient who's 70 years old who just won his class in an Ironman race in Switzerland, and he's 70, but he's going to do Kona next year, Ironman, and I bet he wins that too.
Wow.
So his functional status is much different than maybe another 70-year-old who is just starting to exercise. If you are very debilitated, if you've had been sedentary, you're in your 60s or 70s, and you're just starting on this movement journey, walking is a good place to start, but you may want to speak with your doctor about your deconditioned state, and physical therapy might be a good safe place for some people to start, just so they get some basic muscle strengthening and symmetry going in their body, maybe some balance training. Balance training is so important, and flexibility. And then once they get that base built, then they can go on from there.
Okay. So don't just jump off the couch and start walking 5 miles a day.
I would not. You're
Yeah.
probably be sore and discouraged.
Yeah. All right. So you have to, as I said, I guess my question, you have to tailor that exercise. How much have you been doing all your life? How old you are? All of those things, right? It's not one size fits all. What about sleep? I know that is critical, and I think many people put that at the bottom of the list, and it really should be at the top of the list.
It is hard to have a good day if you've had a bad night's sleep. So our functional and cognitive capacity is so dependent on sleep. Sleep's when our body rests. It's when we actually store new memories, when our body kind of takes out the trash through that lymphatic system, removes the waste that we've built up through the day. It's it's an it's an important critical pillar of good health, and I would encourage people to take a standard approach to their sleep and just start tracking your sleep. See what is actually going on. I say in my book and in my life quite a lot, when we measure something, we can manage it. So starting with tracking your sleep is an important place to start. You may think you're getting 8 hours of sleep just because you've been in bed for 8 hours. It may turn out to be 5.5 or 6. That can be from various reasons, but knowing what is actually going on based around data is a place where I recommend people start with their sleep. And yes, they absolutely should prioritize sleep.
How much sleep should one get? 7 hours, 8 hours? I always remember Dr. DeBakey. I don't know. You're from Texas, right?
I am in Texas.
Yeah. Well, the heart specialist, he said apparently he slept for 3 hours a night and then would perform surgeries, for 12 or 14 hours a day. Now that's on the bell-shaped curve, the other end of the spectrum, right? Most of us are in the middle.
It is, and absolutely respect Dr. DeBakey and his career and what he has brought to medicine in the world. It's highly respectable. Also, I understand he was somewhat difficult to work with.
I'm sure he was.
He would he would have been better off, and maybe even better. Although he was an exemplary surgeon, I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a problem there. But he may have actually lived longer if he had slept more. There is a very small population of people who only require that amount of sleep, and maybe he was one of those. But I mean, those people are like one in half a million or one in a million.
Yeah.
It's very rare.
So generally speaking, for us, the regular then the people in the middle of that bell-shaped curve,
It,
6 hours, 8 hours, what is it?
it's generally 7 to 9 hours.
7 to 9?
Yes. Going over 9 doesn't seem to be helpful. Um, Getting at least 7 is kind of the basement for most people to really optimize their health. But you have to find that sweet spot for you too.
What happens, and I speak to a lot of people going back to baby boomers. That's one of my interests. And they get to the point where they can't sleep through the night. They wake up in the middle of the night, no matter what. Does that come from what? A lack of melatonin and what do you do about that in terms of getting back to sleep or getting a good night's sleep, whatever it is, 7, 8, 9 hours, 7 or 8 hours?
That is quite a complex question, and it's a great question because a lot of people are bothered by this. So tracking your sleep is the first place to start. Figure out when you're waking up, and then potentially why. So it could be your melatonin levels. It could be you may be having cortisol spikes in the middle of the night. The A good way to try to get back to sleep, regardless while you're trying to work this out, is first of all, don't pick up your phone. Um, if getting in front of a screen is absolutely the wrong thing to do, that will not help you get back to sleep. If you just lay there quietly and meditate, um, and I use third eye meditation personally, but just try to keep your mind blank, then that will help people go back to sleep a little faster while they're trying to work out what the issue is. And you can test for these things.
What you mean? How do you test? You mean what your melatonin levels are or cortisol levels?
Yes, yes, both those things can be tested.
And let's say when you have a patient come in for the first time, do you test for those just automatically, or do you wait until they make a complaint, or how does that work?
Well, we always get a screening cortisol level on someone. That's part of our initial blood panel, and of course that has to be done before 10 a.m. But that's just a screening cortisol. And then once we get into their history, their physical examination, what's going on with their body, then if that dictates that we need to take a deeper dive into their cortisol levels or their neurotransmitters of any kind, then we go on to additional, more advanced testing from there.
What do you do about, and I know this is a hot topic, a kind of a sad topic, but there are many caregivers today, caregivers for elderly people, caregivers for even younger people, and it's a huge issue. And caregivers don't seem to care for themselves. And I read a statistic where it said that caregivers die before the person they're caring for. It's a big social issue, I guess, is what I'm describing it as. How do you what do you do for that part of our segment of the population? How do you help them? I'm a social worker. I'm asking it, I guess, from a social work perspective.
So I see this trait a lot in especially women. Men can have this as well, but I see women more often who just give of themselves and give of themselves and sacrifice. They don't take care of themselves. And then they get in such a state of bad health or even early death. At that point, you can't take care of anyone else. You have to put your oxygen mask on first before you help the person next to you. So it's if I admire people who are committed to caring for others. They also have to be committed to care for themselves You can't deliver care to your family member if you yourself are ill and debilitated. So I just encourage people to change their mindset around self-care, that they're not only doing it for themselves, but they're doing it for their loved ones as well. And if I can get them to change how they view that, then most of the time they will start taking better care of themselves.
Do you have a lot of success with that? Like, because patients will share that with you in terms of what they're doing in lifestyle. Obviously, you do that huge intake. And are they amenable? And especially women, like you say, women are caregivers. Maybe it just comes from when you have children, but men can walk away from it, I think, more easily. So are they usually amenable to change?
People are not always amenable to change straight away. And at that point, then we we stay on message with folks if it's something that is really impacting their health. So we don't, in our practice, we don't do executive physicals, where it's a one and done. You come in, you get some blood work, see a doctor, have some other tests. They tell you what's going on, then you go away for a year, right?
Yeah.
You won't move the needle on people's health doing that. And we do what we do because we truly care about people achieving optimal health and wellness in all areas of their life. So if we check in with folks pretty regularly and remind them of what they've told us is important to them, and how they're achieving those goals. So, and self-care is part of that.
So you stay on it. You don't just give them the info and walk away. We only have a couple minutes left. This has been a great conversation. And I've been talking to Dr. Julianna Lindsey, and her title of her book is Radiant Longevity, a physician's protocol for living your best life. We've talked we've covered a lot of topics on the show today, but there's a lot more in the book that we haven't covered. So, Dr. Lindsey, give us a platform, websites to go to for more information about the book and about you and your work.
My book can be found on major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any good bookseller, you'll be able to find Radiant Longevity. You can visit the website at radiantlongevity.com. And of course, I don't have a very robust presence on social media, but I do have social media, mostly Instagram, Facebook, and you can find that as Radiant Longevity as well.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the show today. Great show. I
Thank
really did enjoy the conversation. Thank you.